Hi, my name's Dimitri and I'm running to be the leader of the Green Party of Canada. Today we're going to be tackling the question of the transition to a renewable energy economy and how that transition is going to affect jobs for working Canadians. The people with whom I'll be discussing these issues are not necessarily Green Party members or supporters of mine, but they do have very important perspectives to offer on these issues. So we've come here to the nerve center of corporate Canada, and I hope you'll enjoy our discussion.
Hi, my name is Slater Jewell Kemker, and I'm a filmmaker and climate activist.
Hi, I'm Andre Forsythe, and I'm the founder of Canadian Climate Challenge.
Hi, my name is Tony Leah. I'm an organizer with Green Jobs Oshawa, and I'm chairperson of the Political Action Committee of Unifor Local 222.
I have to admit, Dimitri, when I heard about your background as a Wall Street lawyer, I was a little bit incredulous. How did you get from there to here, where you're running for the leadership of the Green Party?
I think to explain that journey, I have to go back to before I became a Wall Street lawyer and talk about who I was, how I came into this world. My parents were two poor Greek immigrants who didn't even have a year of high school education. And they came over here in the 1950s at this period of time that was really quite exceptional in the history of our country because it was relatively equitable. They started out working in a McCormick's biscuit factory in London, Ontario, and they scrounged together enough money to start a Greek diner, which is what all Greek immigrants did back in those days. And so I grew up in a Greek diner, and I did jobs throughout high school and university. I was a waiter, I was a janitor, I was a bouncer at a student bar. And I managed after 3 years at the University of Toronto, where I was presented with an opportunity to go to New York City. The first thing I learned was, that everybody else was a graduate of an Ivy League law school. I was the only one, and a great many of them had a Roman numeral at the end of their name. It struck me as very odd. The second, the third, the fourth. I'd never seen this before, and I came to understand very quickly that I was in a very white, male, privileged environment. And within 2 years, I just felt like a Martian, frankly, working with people that I really couldn't identify with. I wanted out, and I begged the firm to send me to their Paris office. So they sent me to France, and it was the France of François Mitterrand, the socialist. It was a society that was much less cruel, much less unequal. The cleanliness of the city, homelessness was much less prevalent. There was a great balance between life and work relative to what I had seen in New York City. They didn't work on the weekends. They usually left the office at 8 o'clock in the evening. And then they said to me, your 2 years are up and you have to go back. And I said, no way, I'm not going back to that world. I represented Goldman Sachs. I represented, Monsanto, I'm embarrassed to say, other major financial institutions. And so I kind of took a walk on the wild side for a few years. I left the legal profession and did something that was a bit unusual. I became a professional blackjack player, and joined together with a card counting team made up of disgruntled Wall Street lawyers and bankers.
So you truly do understand economics.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And for
amazing.
And for four years, the roving, marauding band of professional blackjack players, we waged a war against casinos.
No.
And
successfully?
Well, I made less money than I made as a lawyer, but I made a living from it. I supported a family with it, and what I saw in that fight, I couldn't believe the ruthlessness of these corporate entities. I remember nights I would walk into a casino and there would be, sitting at a blackjack table, there would be a mother with a baby in her stroller, and you could tell that she was a gambling addict. You could tell that she had literally cashed her paycheck and had come straight to the casino, was a gambling addict, and had no idea how to play blackjack, and was being fed false information by the pit boss about how to wager her money so that she would lose it even faster. But they didn't care because these people were just, units of account for them. How do we extract as much money as possible from these people before they're cast aside onto the trash heap of humanity? And so for me, it was such an eye-opener, the combination of Wall Street and that I remembered who I was. I'm a poor immigrant son. And when I came back to Canada and decided to resume my legal profession, I vowed I would never represent a corporate client again. I would never represent a high net worth client again. And I went to the other side, the side of light from the side of darkness. I grew up in a time which was really in many ways a very fortunate time to grow up. I was here in Canada during the 50s and the 60s. Tony, as somebody who's active in organized labor, I think you can attest to the fact that this was a period where we had a more equitable country, there was still much about it that was wrong. There was so much racism and social injustice. But young people like myself growing up had opportunities that are evaporating today, and we didn't have to even think about the livability of our planet.
Yeah.
And this word that kept coming to mind as I was watching your extraordinary film was trauma, that my generation has visited upon your generation a profound trauma. And I don't know how you deal with that. I really don't know, and I feel profoundly responsible. I think it's fair to say that my generation is more responsible for this mess that we're in than any other generation. We had the opportunity to fix it, and instead we went in the opposite direction from the one we had to go. So what I'd like to try to figure out in these conversations is how we are going to, pay the profound debt that we owe. How are we going to actually get there? And when I say we, I'm talking about my generation. And I'm hoping that I can be enlightened by all of you in that task.
I'm a filmmaker and climate activist, but I have been in love with movies since I was little, and I've always been filming as I've been growing up. And I felt like that was a way that I could have a direct impact on the world around me. I might not necessarily go and chain myself to a reactor, but I could go and film the stories of people who were, because I felt like that was what I could contribute. So when I was 15, I started making a documentary that I had no idea would be 12 years, but it ended up becoming a 12-year journey of following the global youth climate movement, and going to UN climate change conferences, going to villages and communities on the front lines, and really trying to understand not only what this crisis is around the world, but how we as humans are dealing with it, and also connecting to each other on a human, emotional heart level. Because I think that's one of the most important things that is so often left out of official conversations with this, is remembering that we are emotional creatures and we're not robots, and this is overwhelming. And you brought up trauma, and that is a big part of this, is figuring out how do we heal together, how do we listen to each other, actually listen, and redefine, our relationship to each other and the planet. And that's why I'm here.
In a nutshell.
I was speaking with so many other young people that were in this fight together, really trying to figure out how we could create a just and caring and sustainable world. And I asked the question to one of my friends. I asked it many, many times, and it was, why are you doing this? And again, it was, I want to know that I did everything that I could if everything goes wrong, because I don't want to have to look my kids in the eye or my grandkids in the eye and say that, oh yes, I knew this was happening, I knew the severity of this issue, but I didn't do enough. And I never want to be in that position, but I know, regardless of everything, that I want to be the kind of person that would live in that world, whatever happens. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's an important thing maybe to think about, is this issue is making us question what kind of people we are and who we want to be. I think we need to raise each other up if we're going to move forward.
Well, part of the reason that brought me to the climate space is because I saw all of the positive changes that were necessary for us to survive extinction, and how those benefited my community, and from a racialized community. But the amount of people who I know who are receiving that message, who are in the privileged space where they can even hear that message, is not very high. And the amount of effort that has historically gone into connecting with those people is not very high. And so it's that, again, is where we see kind of the systemic form of racism coming into place. And I don't think we can solve any of these issues unless we have a solid plan as to how that's going to be dealt with.
It's a rapidly evolving story in the pandemic that we want to talk about and tell, is the story of the caring economy.
Yeah.
And that we should be thinking about the success of our economic model by the quality of life of the most vulnerable persons in our society. Mm-hmm. And if those persons are being cared for, if those persons are being treated equitably and humanely, then and only then do we have a successful economy.
Yeah.
But instead, its success is being measured by this bogus and really perverse notion of gross domestic product. It's so perverse that you can actually increase domestic product when something is destroyed and it has to be rebuilt. Domestic product increases even though we are depleting the commons and we're destroying the things upon which our future survival depends. How is it possible that we can imagine growth in circumstances we are rapidly depleting the things upon which our survival depends? So I think the whole emphasis now has to become not on competition and victory, but on the way we care for the most vulnerable members of our society. And I personally feel that resonates with people at a very deep and fundamental and natural level. But we have to have the courage to talk in those terms. It's not easy. I tell you, when you're running for political office, to say, why are we celebrating winners and losers? Why can't we all, quote unquote, win? And especially those who most need our support. So I'm finding that quite challenging, even within my own party.
It's also deeply ingrained. In terms of like, even if you look at your life and as you're growing up, and it's not with malice, but it's just how we all have been brought up of, oh, well, this is what success looks like. And then you get to a certain place by a certain age, and then, you tick off certain boxes and then you'll have done well. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't feel like it's connected to anything real. Yes, it's not. It's all just concepts. Economics, and to my mind, having, worked in the capital markets, first on the side of big business and then the side of a class actions lawyer who went after big business, I've come to believe that economics, classical economics, is voodoo. It's not a science. It's just voodoo. What we call growth is not growth. It's actually destruction. Mm-hmm. What we call excellence is not excellence. It's actually cruelty. Mm-hmm. Barbarism in some cases. Mm-hmm. So, and just unimaginable greed. I can't understand how we have gotten ourselves to a place where we can't even have a discussion about taxing billionaires out of existence without being tarred as extremists, utopian dreamers, and in some cases just Looney Tunes. Like, that's some of the reaction that I get when I say we shouldn't have billionaires in our society. Well, I think it's crazy that anybody would think it's acceptable for tens of thousands of people to be living in the streets in one of the wealthiest countries in the world while 10 people control $65 billion of wealth. That's lunacy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But somehow we've gotten ourselves to a place where if we question this normality, the state of affairs, we're characterized as the extremists. So I think our job is to really change the conversation and be willing to raise the most fundamental questions without which we cannot solve the emergency that we find ourselves in. I've been saying as I've been going around this campaign trail that our economic system imagines us as beings that we are not. It imagines us as rational maximizers of our self-interest. It imagines us as being inherently competitive, ruthless, indifferent to the public good, indifferent to future generations, when in fact, that is not who we are. That we are people who are fundamentally collaborative and cooperative, and that we're profoundly moved by compassion, and we actually prefer peace, justice, and the collective good to our own personal aggrandizement. And I'm just curious what, as being from labor movement, being from the climate movement and racialized community, how you feel about this characterization of humanity that we're seeing in the mainstream media, the way our economic system posits that we are. Do you feel it accurately represents us? Do you think that this is...
No, not at all. And, when it's posed that way, it's profoundly hiding the reality of the class divisions and the other divisions in our society. We're not just all people here that are working together. There's a role that government plays. It's either doing the right things on behalf of what's needed, of people, workers, or it's not. And right now it's not. It's acting in the interests of very powerful, very wealthy people. A class of people whose interests are not the same as the rest of us. And, and that's the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking, what's going to change things,
Well, it's interesting.
Government action has to...
Everything that you've been saying, the thing that I keep thinking of again and again is I've been seeing them on banners. I've been hearing it said for over 10 years, is the idea of we need system change, not climate change. And at first I didn't understand what that meant. And then as I kept going to COPs and learning more and more about what this meant, it makes so much sense, because we're trying to find solutions to a problem within the society that created it. So we'll never actually be able to fix the problem. We won't be able to do this until we actually start changing the society that we live in, which none of us actually chose to live in. We were born into it. I think that everyone wants better jobs and more innovation and cleaner air and water. That's something we all want. So why does it have to be one or the other? Mm-hmm. My family actually live in Alberta, and they work for the tar sands industry. And we haven't really spoken in years. And I was filming there a couple of years ago in northern Alberta, and they didn't want to talk to me and they didn't want to meet with me, and I was really upset and I didn't understand why. And then I realized that at the heart of it, everything that I was saying about the climate crisis, about a green economy, about rethinking how we live and treat each other, when they heard that, when they heard those words, they felt like I was directly attacking the choices that they've made in their life, that they made so that their kids could go to college and be safe. So we need to figure out a way, I think, to not only bring them into the conversation, but also to make it not an us versus them, if you lived your life this way, then you're bad. Everyone is trying to live the best life that they can. And I can't help but feel the best way to get to them is through stories. It's how we learn about each other's people. It's how we grow up and, figure out who we are within the greater world. I always go back to stories and shared humanity, because I don't know, I am now totally rambling and have no idea where I'm going.
Oh, no. Oh, absolutely not. Because everything that you just said, totally resonated with me. And I think you ended on a very strong point, is what stories are we telling? Capitalism is a story that we've been telling and it's one of the inherited stories that we've received, right? And I think we're at a moment where we're challenging a lot of the things that currently exist around us, because we didn't make the choice for half of these things, whether it's institutionalized racism, whether it's capitalism, all of our generations.
We were born into it. We didn't get a choice.
Yeah, and I think the question now is, what other story are we going to tell? How do we shift this narrative of you have to give up everything and everything has to change? I don't think you have to talk to very many people to realize that the world that we live in isn't ideal for most people, for 99% of the population. But we have to start telling a story that is better than that, and that can show that, and show how dealing with climate change and the systemic issues that we've inherited allow us to move forward to that space. But I think one of the biggest questions is how.
Well, I think we have to actually have a plan that is going to result in job creation. Yeah. Very considerable job creation. And I think we have to give workers a guarantee, frankly. So I'm a big fan of the jobs guarantee. Mm-hmm. Certainly to workers in the fossil fuels industry, any industry that could be adversely affected by the transition, and perhaps even more broadly to all of our citizens, a jobs guarantee. Why should we allow anybody to fall into unemployment? I just find that uncivilized that people could be out there willing and able to work and they cannot find a job. And I think, frankly, the existence of unemployment is being used to oppress employed workers, because if they have in their minds the fear that they might one day end up in poverty, then that gives their employer enormous leverage over them to accept substandard conditions of work, inadequate compensation, inadequate benefits. But if they have the assurance that no matter what, a job will be there for them, or a guaranteed basic income will be there for them, they don't have to accept this undignified work, this unfair set of working conditions. So I think we have to provide an absolute assurance to all workers that they will not be left behind, and that can take many forms. An essential part of this is resistance, peaceful resistance in the streets, and it has to be escalated. It has to go far beyond anything we've seen. The people who are profiting from the system have to be It has to be rendered unprofitable by the people because governments aren't going to do it. And even if I were to become the leader of the Green Party of Canada, whoever may become the leader of the Green Party of Canada, we have to be realistic. We have 3 seats in Parliament. And it's going to be very important that we're going to have somebody in the leadership role standing up in the bully pulpit and saying the things that need to be said. We have to stand in the front lines with the activists like yourselves, shoulder to shoulder, as politicians, as elected officials, and get down in the trenches and win this fight together. I mean, we can't do it alone. The activist movement can't do it alone. The political class can't do it alone. We all have to work collectively together towards that end. So I reject this false dichotomy between activism and politics. I think we have to unite them in a singular cause. I think that's the only way we're going to do this within the requisite period of time. So I wanted to talk to you, Tony, about how we engage workers in this struggle and to do a better job of doing that, because I don't think our party has done a good job of doing that at all. There's a perception that the Green Party of Canada is anti-labor. Some of that is exaggerated by our political opponents, particularly in the NDP, because we're fighting for more or less the same voting bloc. But we deserve that criticism to some degree. And I think it's time for us to have an honest conversation with organized labor and Canadian workers about how we can do better.
If the Green Party has not done a great job of engaging workers in this country, I don't think any other party has either. And if you are articulating the things that will improve our society and that workers will benefit from, then the ability to rally thousands and thousands of people has got to be there. If we look back at our history, the things that have mobilized people have been when somebody has articulated a bold vision. That's where the labor movement came from. That's the New Deal. When people talk about a Green New Deal, it's because there was a New Deal that really did accomplish things and really did inspire people and mobilize people. And a lot of it was built on what can the government do? And of course, public ownership is critical. I mean, what do all Canadians honor about our society? It's our government health care. You can't have that without public ownership.
It's the crown jewel of
Canada.
Public health.
Ontario Hydro was also a wonderful institution in this province, which has been now mostly sold off, and we can see the results of that. So nobody should be nervous or afraid of advocating for public ownership. That just means that government should act in the interests of the people, not the interest of corporations. If you don't have public ownership, what do you have? You're doing things to benefit the owners of the corporations, most of whom don't even live in this country, and are taking their profits out. How does that benefit us?
Yeah, I'm curious what the perspective, though, is of Slater and Andre, who come from it from a different angle as youth climate activists. Do you agree that this is something that's important, that this isn't a key part of the solution to the climate emergency, is taking public ownership of at least parts of major industries? Do you think we can get to a solution without doing that?
I personally definitely don't think so. I think it's absolutely instrumental for the government to play that role and broker the partnerships necessary in order to do that. And if I could push just a little bit more on the labor question, though, is so if nationalization is a strong option, then if that's something you're putting forth to labor right now, are they responding well to that? Is like what's missing? Because if we've identified that as what needs to happen to secure good jobs, why isn't labor listening? How do we communicate to them more effectively?
That's why I would say that you have to make the appeal to workers who are the majority of our society, and not specifically to the leaders of unions, some of whom have been very supportive and some of whom aren't. Right? So to some extent you have to bypass that and appeal to the majority of our society and really find a way to engage them. I'm not saying it's easy.
No,
not easy, but it's the ordinary people that can build a mass movement.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the reason why I asked that is because I feel like coming from a racialized community, that's a big area where the Green Party has historically not been very strong, and you have to go and put this work in and identify with these communities. And I feel like that's something the Green Jobs Oshawa is doing a good job with, and that the Green Party could definitely learn from in both of our communities, is getting into those communities, listening to them, and the amount of effort that has historically gone into connecting with those people is not very high. And so that's something I don't hear from any of the parties yet. I've yet to hear yet how the Green Party, or you specifically, are aligning with racial justice in order to support these type of movements, in order to facilitate these changes.
So, for example, the movement around defunding the police. You know, we have a systemically racist justice system and a systemically racist law enforcement community. How could anybody conclude otherwise when blacks and indigenous persons are so grotesquely overrepresented in the correctional institutions of this country? You know, they just came out with another study here in Toronto. I would imagine that we've all heard something about it,
Yep.
which talked about the frequency with which black people are targeted by police violence, how often they have been arrested for cannabis consumption. And the statistics are so stark that we can't deny that there's systemic racism. So the bottom line is we need to reallocate resources away from militarized policing that is disproportionately targeting indigenous persons and black persons and other racialized persons in this country, and invest it in the causes of behaviors that we have categorized as criminal. What are those causes? You know, those causes are poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, domestic abuse, inadequate treatment of mental health issues.
Yeah.
That's where the money should be going. We should be lifting people out of the suffering they're experiencing, the trauma, as Dr. Gabor Mate puts it,
Yeah.
which leads to substance abuse, and take it away from this militarized police force that is ultimately simply treating the symptoms, not the causes of this. So that's one way, and you know, I hear what people are saying in the black community. I think they're absolutely right, and they merit our support in this. It's a difficult subject to address with Canadians.
So, I mean, it is for sure, and I think defunding the police is something we hear a lot about right now, for sure. But I know for part of our community is just also not hearing the message of how this could be different. So that's it. It's one thing to echo the cries of the community who have put themselves out there to make those cries. But my question is more so, how are you communicating to them how racial justice is achieved through the Green Party's platform or your specific platform? Yeah.
So another part of my platform, and this is something that I, as a lawyer, can speak to from personal experience, and that is that most Canadians, even people in the middle class, can't afford legal representation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And this is particularly true of racialized communities because they are, their standard of living is even lower than that of, you know, predominantly white communities. And so we have to actually allocate resources to ensure that every single citizen has legal representation. And I think we have to the core of the problem is, I say this as a member of the legal profession, lawyers are paid too much money. It's all there is to it, they're paid too much money. And so I'm proposing that we tax the legal profession, and also that we tax corporate litigants who disproportionately use the justice system, which is funded by taxpayers, okay? And we put that into an Access to Justice fund to ensure that every single Canadian has adequate legal representation.
But is that enough?
No, no.
Okay.
It's just one of many things that need to be done. Another thing is we have to have a judiciary that reflects the racial diversity of this country.
Yeah.
We don't, you know. And the people who should be choosing the judges are not the politicians. They should not be making that decision because they're going to put people in power. And I've seen this. I've never encountered in all my time practicing law a radical leftist on the bench.
Yeah.
Ever. They are all
What's that?
they all ascribe to the liberal or conservative ideology because they are appointed by the leaders of these parties.
yes.
So, you know, members of the community need to decide who the judges are going to be.
And so do we feel like that deals with the zero-sum perception that if we are helping black people, that or racialized communities, that we're tokenizing them, that we need to help them? There's a lot of people in the country who, the second they hear someone out, we're trying to help someone else, they're feeling the loss immediately. And that's, how do you deal with that challenge? How do you speak to both of those communities?
Well, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. How do you, as a member of a racialized community, think we can do a better job of speaking to this?
That's a great question. And I think we have to articulate a vision that we're all moving together towards a better future. And I think that's part of the challenge is we need to highlight the fact that there's a ton of voices that sit right in that middle. We talk about white privilege, but not all whites feel privileged. And if we are juxtaposing blacks against whites, then we're going to continuously have this problem.
Yes.
And so I think it's brokering that communication between the communities, and a bold vision of dealing with climate change has shown me the brightest prospects for all of us. And I think if we're talking like that, then defunding the police makes a lot more sense, because we're painting a big enough picture. And I don't see enough of the Green Party getting out there and painting that picture boldly and strongly. And that's what I would like to see.
Rather than adopt a dialogue and a program that ends up dividing them, we have to understand that there are victims throughout our society, and certainly disproportionately you'll find oppressed persons in racialized communities, but there are white workers who are being oppressed. There are white people living in the streets. There are white people who are not getting adequate treatment in terms of substance abuse and mental health issues. So these forms of oppression permeate our society, although they are disproportionately visited upon certain groups. And I think our obligation as a party is to stand with all oppressed peoples, including here in Canada.
Yes.
What we have done, what this society has done to Indigenous peoples, is one of the most horrific crimes of modern times.
Yeah.
We are guilty of genocide. This country is guilty of genocide. And it's not just cultural genocide. We committed an out-and-out genocide. And we have to come to terms with that. And that means not just reconciliation, that means reparations.
Yes.
We owe Indigenous people reparations. That's a tough conversation to have.
One of the things that's interesting about this conversation is that it mirrors so much of what needs to be done within the climate movement. And so what I want to know from you is, why should I support you?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to get us there?
Yeah.
And can you get us there?
You're asking a question that candidates get often asked, but there's an unspoken assumption in the question that a leader of a political party can him or herself make the decisive difference. I can't. All I can promise you is that I won't betray you. That's all I can do. And if you ask me, why should we believe you're not going to betray us when so many politicians have, all I can say to you is, look at my record. Look at my record. Have I backed down in the face of, ferocious resistance and vilification when I felt that their cause was right? And I think that my record demonstrates that I haven't. And so I think you can trust me to do my best. I think you can trust me to be principled, but I can't do this alone. No way. Well, I don't know about you guys. I feel like that was a pretty damn good discussion. So.